Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Fred Kalil. We are talking about signing day today, a big day for high school football seniors and juniors, and of course the colleges that sign these young men to play football. Joining us is our recruiting expert, Wommack of Rivals.com. Woody, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit first about the biggest winners and losers on this signing day. What do you think?
Well, Fred, it was kind of sleepy as a whole. I mean, as you know, since the early signing period started, a lot of the big names come off the board then. But today, the big winner for us, at least overall, Alabama clinching the #1 class. It was coming down to the wire. Georgia was pushing. They were hoping to get a letter in from five-star Deuce Robinson today, a tight end out of California. He decided to wait. And Alabama looks like because of the math, they're going to hold on to that #1 spot. Georgia right behind them, nipping on their heels, and that's kind of been the way it's been the last few years. The Tide do it again. Georgia, of course, loaded with a ton of talent. And then South Carolina today pulling off one of the shocks of the day, landing five-star Nicholas Harbor out of the Washington, D.C. area, a guy that is an elite track athlete as well, going to do both sports for the Gamecocks.
You know, in South Carolina, I think is a team that folks have to watch with Shane Beamer in there, don't you think? I mean, because he could build it quickly.
Yeah, he's doing a great job in the transfer portal. We saw a lot of their portal players come in and have success, including their quarterback, Spencer Rattler, last year. He's coming back. And then they're doing it on the recruiting trail as well, getting guys in state. And then, of course, flexing their muscle. I mean, the Harbor is a guy that Michigan wanted. Oregon had him out for a visit last weekend, and we're really pitching the track aspect to him. But in the end, South Carolina wins over his family. People have compared him to Jadeveon Clowney. He wants to play offense and not defense. But yeah, that's definitely a good sign for them, especially with how good they looked down the stretch last year.
You know, there's another young man, Dylan Raiola. He's out of Arizona, but this guy has been to 3 different high schools. I mean, before he ever even gets to college. What does that do, you think, for a recruiter when he's looking at a player like that?
You know, it's crazy. It's kind of the new normal. He lived in Texas, and then his family moved to Arizona. So it's okay, he's moving to Arizona. That's high school #2. Now they're building a new house across town, and so he's moving across town. So he does have, bona fide moves, as they say. But it is interesting because a lot of times you'll see coaches say that they don't want that. But there's lots of players, lots of guys you might not even know that played in the NFL who went to several high schools, and especially down in South Florida, guys are announcing high school commitments almost like they do colleges when they're switching from school to school. So it's different than back in the day. Sometimes it can be a red flag, but other times it can just be, okay, the family moved or things changed. But players, just like the transfer portal in college, they're trying to find the best place to play in high school and the best chance to win and, of course, make it to the next level.
We've talked about this a ton, but still, it still fascinates me, the transfer portal, and I guess, when I think about it, Woody, I think it's fair because, coaches can leave after whenever, so why can't the players leave after a year and they can pull the scholarship after a 1-year commitment? A lot of people don't understand those letters of intent are 1 year, like 4 1-year commitments, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, the old team option when you're talking about professional players.
Yeah.
They can keep you, but they can also cut you loose. And I like the freedom of movement for the players. Of course, you don't want to see a guy going to 4 or 5 schools in 5 years. But, I went to 3 different colleges, Fred, so there was no transfer.
How many?
3.
All right.
So there was no portal for me, so it's hard for me to judge the players for moving around because hey, look, you're a kid. Sometimes you can't decide what you want to do, and you may look for a better opportunity. And so I'm glad the players have the chance, especially if the coaches are moving or the coaches that recruited them, that they have a chance to move as well.
Have the junior colleges, how have they played a role? Are they still playing a role in college football recruitment?
Yeah, it's interesting because of the portal, we're seeing, the back 10% of high school prospects maybe not getting the opportunities that they would have gotten out of high school. Now they're going to JUCO. And last year, especially after spring practice, we saw a bunch of late JUCO signees get added by a bunch of different schools. So they're having to wait a little longer to find their spots. But they do still have a role. I know a lot of prominent JUCOs, have maybe shut down or moved around, and now there's a lot more kids playing in California. There's a school down in Miami where people are going. So the landscape's always shifting, but if you can play, and you get an opportunity, the cream is going to rise to the top, and we've kind of seen that with some JUCO players still getting drafted, a guy like Brandon Ayuk. So there are still those opportunities there for JUCO guys.
And what about the big lineman that Georgia landed? Because, like I said, man, I mean, the depth is what, Kirby strives for, because, I mean, that's what he learned, I think, from Nick Saban at Alabama. They're trotting out, 10 or 11 guys that are 6'6", 300 pounds playing on the offensive line.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that today. Bo Hughley, of course, from right down the road here in Atlanta, Langston Hughes, didn't get picked for either major all-star game. This is a guy who's going to Georgia. He's 6'7", 290 pounds. I mean, looks out on the field like a grown man, and you're wondering, how does this guy not get a shot at an all-star game? And he actually asked me. We ended up getting him into the Polynesian Bowl out in Hawaii. He went out there and really impressed a lot of people. So that's how deep Georgia is now, that they've got so many big-time linemen coming in that the guys are almost slipping through the cracks on the national level. Another guy they have like that, Monroe Freeling from South Carolina, a guy who was a beanpole 2 years ago. Now he's 300 pounds and it looks like he's ready to come in and compete right away.
They often talk about cornerbacks being unicorns. They're so hard to find really good ones. But Georgia did land a top one, didn't they?
Yeah, they went out and got Ellis Robinson today, looking ahead to the class of 2024. This is a guy that Kirby identified personally and loved. Just kind of like you build them in a lab. I mean, you mentioned it's tough to find, especially the big physical guys. That's how they like them in the SEC, kind of like Kalil Ringo, who was, a star for the Dogs the last few years. Ellis Robinson is in that same mold. Big, fast, physical, can turn and run, and also has some experience on offense. So, he can also catch the ball as well, key to causing turnovers. So kind of exactly what Georgia looks for, and they get a jump start on next year's class.
What does signing day, we used to get so keyed up for this day. I mean, everybody was keyed up. There would be like sports bars and restaurants packed out. We got to watch signing day. And now it's just like, it's the second one. It's kind of like basketball or baseball. You have an early signing day, so there's really not, it kind of took a little bit of the air out of the sails for this one, didn't it?
Yeah, and what's weird is this year was really rough because we had the new transfer portal window in December. You've got teams getting ready for bowl games and playoffs, and then it's 4 days before Christmas. That's when we had the first signing day. And now they've moved the Super Bowl back a week too. I mean, some years signing day would come after the Super Bowl. So now we're right in the middle of that as well, the NBA All-Star game. So I think coaches are going to push for that early period to kind of either go away or be moved to either before the season or after the playoff, because for them, it's really hurting them when you're trying to keep your own players on your roster, you're trying to manage the portal and bring guys in, and then you're trying to close out your recruiting class, and you might be replacing coaches or getting ready to play in a bowl game, or more importantly, the expanded playoff, and we're going to have 12 teams in there. It's going to be chaos, and we know that these coaches, they like to be able to have time to get out on the golf course too.
Yeah, of course. You got to have some time off, right?
Yes, exactly.
But coaches leave. I mean, they can leave after a year. I mean, they might, leave a young man at a school that they recruited, and, this guy might not get along with the new coach, and he might not get his shot. So, I mean, it works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm not a big fan of let's move it back to August. Well, it's like, how many coaches change positions, at the end of the year? So if kids are signing in August, it's just going to be another free-for-all of them trying to move around as well. I'd prefer if they, maybe got rid of the February date and just made it sometime around when kids can early enroll, in early January 15th or something like that, with the ad drop date at the schools. Give them a chance to enroll early, and the guys that aren't, if they want to wait longer, they can.
That's another thing I think that has really helped. I mean, it helps a student, I would think, be an early enrollee, because you get acclimated to college. You might miss your senior prom, or you might go back to high school for your senior prom, but you get acclimated to college early. I don't think that early semester hurts. I think it's a good thing, don't you?
Yeah, and it used to be 1 or 2 guys. Now it's 10, 12, 15 guys. It's almost like if you don't go early, you're the exception. And that's what's needed. I mean, then by the time the season rolls around, these guys have been there for 8, 9 months, working. They're almost not even freshmen anymore, like they were 10, 15 years ago, where they were, hey, we've been on campus for 2 months, or maybe even remember, some guys used to just report in August and start training. So totally different. It's sped up the clock a little bit, but I think it's really helped the development of a lot of guys.
Yeah, I always remember it was like the second week of August, man. Everybody had to be there. Second week of August, you showed up, and in the summer, I mean, you really kind of ran on your own. You did whatever you had to do on your own. You know, once you left spring football. But spring football back then, though, was 20 practices. Now it's only 10, right?
Right, exactly. And it's changed, but it's much more professional. I mean, these guys are around. They're working. You know, maybe they get a week off here, a week off there, but you know, it's voluntary only in the meaning. I mean, these guys
Right, exactly.
and be working.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Okay, let's talk about the quarterback at the University of Georgia, Stetson Bennett. There's a guy who, man, that guy took a lot of guff from a lot of people, you know, media, whoever, and all he did was go out and win a couple of national championships. So who's going to step in now and fill those shoes, do you think, at Georgia?
Well, to me, the leader is Carson Beck. I mean, he's been kind of the established backup, you know, the last year or so, of course, ever since JT Daniels went down. And I almost thought that he would be the guy that might jump over, you know, Stetson at times last season. They've also got, you know, Brock Vandegrift, who was a five-star recruit. He's going to be competing for the job. And then they got Gunnar Stockton, who's also a highly ranked guy, you know, that a lot of people like because he can also run the ball. So they've got a few different guys, but I just think Beck's been in the program. He hasn't left. I mean, that's the thing is, you know, he's been there for a few years now. He could have easily hopped in the portal. He's decided to stick it out. And I think that patience is going to kind of pay off. And especially, you know, if the staff doesn't change, I think that continuity is going to play well for him. I do expect that Vandegrift, if he doesn't win the job, I can't imagine, you know, he sticks around. He might be a portal guy after the spring, but we'll see where that battle lands. You never know what he could come back focused like with the job on the line, especially after a few years of being down on the depth chart.
Okay, well now you talked about it. Who's going to coach him? I mean, does Todd Monken stay now that Tom Brady's retired? I mean, he was, of course, talked about going down back to the NFL and possibly coaching, and now, you know, in Tampa Bay possibly, and you know, Tom Brady retired today. So, what do you think about Todd Monken and what will happen with him?
You know, the interesting thing is, you know, he's always been viewed as kind of an NFL guy. He's really a football savant. I mean, this is a guy who loves the X's and O's, and we've seen some of the creative things he's done with their offense. But the knock on him is he doesn't exactly love recruiting, and we know, you know, Kirby Smart is obsessed with recruiting. He came from Nick Saban. That's how they love to do it. And I'm curious to see. I think he could be deserving of an NFL head coaching job. My thing is,
wow.
Why would you jump to Tampa, like you said, an unsettled situation? I personally think, I mean, guys have been hired with less experience than him to be a head coach. I don't think he's going to get that job this year, but maybe he comes back to Georgia for another year, and maybe he's considered, you know, for a head coaching job either in college or in the NFL if it's the right situation.
Well, I mean, you know, I think that they're really, I mean, but he's had all the tools here, of course, you know, with Georgia, with their running game. I mean, they can pretty much do what they want on offense. They, you know, and again, that's kind of what Nick Saban does at Alabama. But really, Georgia, how they've kind of passed Alabama now in the SEC with back-to-back championships. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because they didn't play this year, or that was the weird situation. Is with Alabama lost those two games by just a handful of points, and you know, I think they wanted their shot. You saw a lot of their players and their fans, you know, when TCU was, you know, getting blown out in the national championship game, saying we should have been there and instead of them. So I don't think I think Georgia definitely. Hey, look, you're the king right now of all of college football and the SEC. You've won 2 in a row, but I don't think Alabama is dead yet. I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't count them out because they're going to come back highly motivated. We've seen the changes Nick Saban's made on his staff, and I think he's done that for a reason. And the reason is, you know, he wants to get back on top. So hopefully they end up playing next year here in Atlanta. We could be there and really see them go to battle.
That would be a lot of fun. But, you know, going back to your recruiting rankings, you know, you've got Ohio State. That's one team in the Big Ten, I think, them and Michigan. So it's kind of back to the Big Two and how many are left over now in the Big Ten. I don't even know how many are in the Big Ten now, 14 or something. But anyway, it's back to the Big Two, isn't it, with Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten?
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, you know, a lot of my friends who are Ohio State fans have had enough of Ryan Day. They're ready to fire him because
I know, I hear that too. I mean, it's crazy.
It's insane. I told him, I said, it's not your God-given right to win the Big Ten every year. You know, Michigan has done a good job. They really were upset with losing at home. They ended up getting in the playoff, and then they almost beat Georgia. A game they
Right.
probably could have won, but that made them even more mad. Oh, he blew the game. Ryan Day can't manage the game. He's got to go. I'm so who are you going to hire to replace him? I'd love to see how that would work out. But I think Ohio State fans are getting a little restless. But I think they need to chill out. You've been in the playoff. You were 1 point away from beating a national champion, and I think you're on the right track. We'll put it that way.
Well, for the second time, Georgia beat a Big 12 team in the playoff. Of course, Oklahoma put up a much better fight than TCU. What are your thoughts on TCU and the Big 12 and how they've stuck around? I thought for a minute they might, pull apart, but they've stuck together.
Yeah, and everything kind of broke bright for TCU. I mean, they had a comeback win against Kansas State earlier in the year, and then of course the heartbreaking loss. But just with like I said, Alabama losing twice opened the door for them to get in. We saw Oregon and USC in the Pac-12, who I think would have put up a better fight. I mean, we saw what Georgia did to Oregon, but I would have loved to watch USC play in the playoff. So I think everything fell right for TCU. I wouldn't expect them to be back in the playoff next year, but look, it was Sonny Dykes' first year. He did a good job building the roster. The conference as a whole is there. The problem is they're about to lose, Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, and they're replacing them with, UCF, BYU,
Right,
Cincinnati, the same caliber of teams.
I want to ask you too about LSU and Brian Kelly, because he took a lot of junk, when he took over there, and they didn't want him around. But I mean, they had a great recruiting class this year, and they had a pretty good season.
Yeah, it's crazy. They really did, and it's funny because LSU fans like to act like, oh, we knew it was going to be great all along.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, they're screaming Tiger Beat, right?
Hey, there was a little skepticism among the people I know who are LSU fans. They ended up making it to the SEC championship game, and they really put up a good fight with Georgia. So there's always going to be talent in Louisiana. Brian Kelly went there because he wants to win a national championship and get guys that he couldn't quite get to Notre Dame. So if they can keep recruiting well, they can keep those guys close to home and really keep Alabama, keep Georgia, keep Texas from stealing guys out of their backyard. They're going to be in that conversation every year just because he's a great coach and they're going to have great talent.
Now let's look at the SEC East. You got Tennessee in there. What are your thoughts on Tennessee? I mean, they had a pretty good year this year recruiting, did they not? I think you had them at. Do you have them at number 9 this year?
Yeah, they had a pretty good class. And they really, what's interesting is they wrapped up a lot of that class before they had their huge season. There wasn't a lot of late guys. So I think we're going to see next year an even bigger bump, especially with offensive players who really know that Josh Heupel can put up those big numbers. They have a 5-star quarterback coming in, Nico Iamaleava from California. Had a chance to see him out in Hawaii as well at the Polynesian Bowl. And this guy, I mean, just a very unique player. I mean, 6'6", very athletic, and I think he's perfect in Josh Heupel's offense. I wouldn't be surprised if 3 or 4 games into the year next year, he's their starter. And I think as long as Heupel's there, they're going to put up big numbers on offense, and they can get talent on defense that he couldn't get when he was at UCF. So I'm not saying they're ready to challenge Georgia, year in and year out, but they're building something good there. And that class led by Nico is a charismatic guy. People are going to want to play with him in the years down the road.
Let's talk about Georgia Tech if we could for a minute. Brent Key, coming in, taking over, and of course their guys were already wrapped up in the early signing day as well. But Georgia Tech, obviously because of the engineering piece, they've got to recruit a different kind of a kid. So how many kids do they have you think they can play in this recruiting class? Has it been a pretty good one for them?
Well, it's interesting because I think they would have been better off if they made the transition quicker. Like we weren't sure. They're looking out. Willie Fritz is going to get the job. They end up sticking with Brent Key. I think if they had just said early on, hey, we're going to stick with him, he would have done a better job closing out. They ended up going and recruiting some guys with tools. Of course, he's an offensive line coach. They got a couple guys on the offensive line. Patrick Screws out of Alabama, a guy that I liked a lot, 6'6", 295 pounds. And then Gabe Fortson from right here in the Atlanta area, another offensive lineman. Those are the 2 best players in their class. We know Brent Key, an offensive line coach, a guy who knows how important the trenches are. And kind of taken, almost the opposite approach of Jeff Collins, even though he was on his staff, is like, hey, we're hard hat, lunch pail type guys, as opposed to, the sizzle and the
Right.
Waffle House and all that stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, Brent Key too. I mean, let's not forget, he played at Georgia Tech. Of course, coached with George O'Leary, played for George O'Leary, coached with Paul Johnson as well. So he's a Tech guy.
Right, and we know, O'Leary was the king of, hey, we got to win it. We got to win the battle up front. We're going to smash it down their throat. So, and he was obviously a no-nonsense guy as well. And, of course, Coach Johnson, loved to run the ball. So I think he's got a lot of that in him. I do think he can relate to players. I think he's always been a good recruiter everywhere he's been. So I think he needs a little time to prove what they can do. And like you said, they kind of got to recruit a little bit different type of player, but there's also a lot of players from Atlanta, in the transfer portal that kind of want to come back home as well. And once they're transferring, it's a lot easier to get them in, especially if they have the grades they need than it is just trying to take a guy from high school.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about the two other schools in the Sun Belt Conference here in our state, Georgia Southern and Georgia State. I mean, those are two schools. Southern, of course, before they joined the Sun Belt in what was then 1AA, they were a national powerhouse. Now they're in FBS, so that's a little bit tougher road for them, but they've been coming on pretty well in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and then they've got and now Georgia Southern has a legitimate coaching staff there. And Coach Helton, they're never gonna blow you away with the recruiting rankings, because it's just not the kind of player they go and get. But they've done a great job in the portal as well. Once again, guys from the state of Georgia who maybe were overlooked, go somewhere else, want to get back close to home, want to go close to their family. That's the kind of player they're targeting. And they've updated the offense there too, which has helped. It's always been the backbone as, the triple option.
Right.
And players don't necessarily love that. Especially you want a exciting offense. So, a guy they got that I like, from here in Atlanta, Carver High, DeAndre Buchanan, playmaker. I think a lot of teams kind of slept on him, and I think adding pieces like that, their quarterback, I was obviously really good last year, and they won some big games. So I think they're building on the right tack, and Georgia State the same way. It's tough to year in and year out be consistent, but we've seen them. They beat Tennessee a few years ago. We've seen them win big games, and I think the key is to just keep building. Don't rely too much on the portal. Make sure you're still building that foundation in high school, but then pick and choose, and you got guys that can help you in the portal and help fill out your roster.
Well, I've always said Georgia State, they should never even have to get out of their car, right? They can go recruit without just, driving around Atlanta. You could get enough players to really be a top-notch team.
Yeah, you should just be on MARTA going,
You could do that too, yeah.
It goes right down there by the stadium.
Exactly.
Right through campus. So
Yeah.
I agree with you on that one. There's enough talent here. You got to keep these guys close to home and get them to represent the city. And I think they've done a good job. And they've done a good job going into South Carolina and finding a lot of sleepers. They got a lot of connections up there, and we've seen a lot of guys have success from there as well.
Well, again, Sean Elliott's a big old line coach. He's a former old lineman, and he likes that attack offensive line like so many people do. We got one more to talk about, Woody. Kennesaw State, I know they're FCS, but we got to give Brian Bohannon some love. He does a great job up there, and I think, the Owls have a good program rolling.
Yeah, they actually do, and they have a really nice facility. When you drive by there, you're like, wow, this is you see why they're a target to move up. Once again, another very attractive portal program. They've gone and got guys from the SEC. They had a transfer from Vanderbilt. So they're building things the right way up there. It's been quick, but they they clearly have the resources that they need to get things done. There's a lot of FBS schools that would kill for a stadium like that. Even a program like USF doesn't have their own stadium. So I like what they're doing there, and I think people want to come to Atlanta. We always talk about, hey, they got to keep these guys in the city, but there's a lot of players from around the South that would love to play college football here in the city.
Well, and that's the thing. I think Kennesaw State did it the right way. They've got that nice stadium on campus, not too big. It's their size. And they started slow, and they're building as they go. And I think that's, they didn't get too aggressive, or they're, what's that old, what did Aunt Maggie used to say? Your eyes are bigger than your stomach. They didn't do that one.
Yeah.
Right? They built it the right way.
Right. That's never been a problem for me.
Yeah, me either, man. That's why I said that.
But I totally agree. Like I said, they're doing it step by step, and they're moving up. And you know, they've won games. They've shown they can do it, and the talent's going to follow you as long as you've proven that you've had success. So yeah, I like what they've done, and they've done a good job filling out the roster.
Woody Wommack, thank you so much for joining us for Rivals.com. You've just completed our first half-hour show here on Atlanta News First Plus. It's been a great show, man, the debut show, and Woody did it. You pulled us through, brother. Thank you so much.
I don't remember that. I want to come back for another episode.
Hey, man, you can come back anytime you want, Woody. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.